Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, my next guest's background has always been the weather. For nearly 4 decades, Los Angeles came to know Fritz Coleman through his work as the weather reporter on KNBC. And when he retired from his weather gig 2 or 3 years ago, Fritz knew he wasn't done working. And I quote him, as he put it, that 11 o'clock news kept me from a lot of things. Now I can do all those things that massage my soul, be curious, and discover more, unquote. Fritz's passion now is the Media Path podcast, which he co-hosts with Louise Palanker, veteran radio producer and documentarian. With 150 episodes released so far, Media Path podcast is a look back at what has defined our media for the past half century. It's a journey down a new path of remembering, reevaluating our shared memories and histories. And to watch or listen, go to MediaPathPodcast.com, as well as YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And Fritz, welcome to the show.
Ira, I'm happy to be here, but I'm right here for the donuts and the bagels. That's all.
I have to ask you the most important question, which is,
Please.
How did you go from comedy to weather? Because that's your background as well, which I didn't mention, but how did you get from comedy to weather?
Real meteorologists hate this explanation, but it's 1,000% true. I came out to California in 1980 to pursue a career as a stand-up comic. And while I was working at the Comedy Store, I was a regular performer at the Comedy Store. My friend that worked at NBC brought his boss and his boss's wife. This was the news director and the news director's wife, to see me perform at the Comedy Store one night. Mm-hmm. And when I was on stage, I told some stories about doing the weather in the Navy. I worked for Armed Forces Radio and Television in the Navy, and they forced me to do the weather against my will. And I didn't know anything about weather. And I had a couple of anecdotes about that. And when my show was over, my friend brought his boss to meet me, and the man said, I loved your stories about doing the weather against your will. Do you have any desire to come to Channel 4 in Los Angeles and do some vacation relief weathercasting for me? I have a Maine weatherman that hasn't had a vacation in a year. I need some help on weekends. Would you be interested in coming and being a utility player? And I almost passed out. I was making $25 a night at the Comedy Store. I said, oh my God, when do you want me to start? And may I please carry your wife to the car for you? I'll do anything. So I had to audition. I auditioned and got the job. And I did the utility position, the fill-in position, for 2 years. And then when the Maine weatherman, the predecessor to the Maine weather job, left to go to CBS, I was bumped up to the Maine job and retired just a couple of weeks shy of my 40th anniversary at NBC.
Amazing.
I always say it's the greatest stroke of show business luck since Lana Turner was discovered at Schwab's Pharmacy on Sunset Boulevard.
Except you were discovered at the Comedy Store, not
Schwab.
Yeah.
But
they're both on Sunset Boulevard.
Real weathermen, real meteorologists hate that story.
But they're both on Sunset Boulevard, both Schwab
yes, they are.
and the Comedy Store. So there's a parallel universe for you. So
yeah.
Why do real weathermen, as you call them, hate that story? Because
listen, I don't have a degree in meteorology or atmospheric sciences. I could not get the job as a weatherman now with climate change and the more competitive nature of television news and so many stations doing news simultaneously and the shortening American attention span. I couldn't get the job now without a degree in meteorology or atmospheric sciences and have that little AMS seal that you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. I couldn't get hired. These people that have the job now know infinitely more than I do. I was hired as a personality creature. I always said that my job on a newscast was to be the palate cleanser between the tragedy at the top of the show and the sports. That was my job.
Because the sports can be depressing too if you're
really right.
Team and it doesn't work. Well, it is an amazing career, and now you've got this whole other thing going on. When did you get together with Louise to figure out this podcast and what it's about?
Well, Louise has been my friend for 30 or 35 years. She produced 2 of my one-person shows. And we've always been a couple of people that saw eye to eye on most forms of entertainment, books, politics, movies, television shows. We always kind of had similar opinions. And so then I retired, and my contract at NBC, which was very restrictive, I couldn't do outside media with them. When that lapsed, she said, why don't you just come and do a podcast and we'll make a show that is just a continuation of our regular conversations, and we'll invite people in to join. And I think that's a fantastic idea. She had experience in the podcasting world. She, first of all, was one of the founders of one of the great radio companies, Premier Radio Networks, which was ultimately sold to Clear Channel, which was ultimately sold to iHeartRadio. So she's had quite a career, and she's retired from that now. Then became a documentary filmmaker. She has, and then did 5 podcasts. Since their inception, she was tweaking and figuring out how to do it. And so when she invited me on, I just had to surf this wave that she had already created, and I'm having a blast. It's so much fun.
It's great. In other words, you fell into it again. You fell
Yes.
the luck again, third time around.
Right.
Yeah, that's excellent. You mentioned earlier, and I want to get back to the podcast, but you mentioned earlier about your one-man shows. Tell us a little bit about that. What did those entail?
Well, it was my stand-up background.
Okay.
I did 8 appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, Gary Shandling, and Joan Rivers. I opened for Ray Charles in concert. I opened for Debbie Reynolds in concert. So my background was stand-up. But what I created for myself about 20 years ago is what I'll call single topic monologues. So my first one was a show called It's Me, Dad, which was about 90 minutes describing the fun and the frustration and the mystery of being a father. That was the first show that Louise produced. My second show was about divorce. That was called The Reception. And she produced that one as well. My third show is about the news, called Tonight at 11. My fourth show was my first show about aging, called Defying Gravity. And this new one is sort of a more enhanced and updated version of the aging process, called Unassisted Living. And right now it's streaming on Tubi. It's a free streaming service. It's an hour and it's a lot of fun. Somebody reviewed it as an hysterical baby boomer support group. So that's my background in comedy. I've always done that. Even when I was doing the weather, I was doing shows 2 or 3 nights a week at the Improv and the Comedy Store. So
you just keep rolling along. I get the sense, and we don't know each other, but I get the sense that you're very comfortable with yourself, regardless of where you are in the age category.
I'll tell you something. This sounds dramatic. I've never been happier in my life than I am right now. I mean, I don't have a job to obsess over. I was a workaholic, no question about it. I get to see my grandchildren. What you mentioned in that comment about the 11 o'clock news, I've often said that the 11 o'clock news, and I did it for 40 years, is the greatest speed bump to a social life ever invented. I had I have 3 children, 2 sons at the time, and I sometimes couldn't put them to bed at night. Sometimes I couldn't do their homework with them because I had to go back to work, particularly if it was a serious weather day, a storm or fires or something like that. And so I'm retired now. I get to pay attention to my grandchildren. I get to help my children with their parenting, and I'm sort of making up for lost time, and it's fantastic. I've never been happier.
Most people would think that 11 o'clock would allow you to have most of the day to be with kids and grandkids and get things.
Well, I actually did. I did the 5, 6, and 11 o'clock news.
That's the difference.
And so that's a split shift.
Right.
I would start, and because when one forecaster is on duty, they're responsible for all their content. So I didn't have a meteorologist build my maps and everything. I had to do all that myself. So I would go to work at about noon. I would figure out the weather story. Like all news reporters, I had to figure out what my story was that day, and then go online and find the information I needed to present that story, and National Weather Service and other services that we had. Prepare my presentation, build the maps, do the 5 and 6 o'clock news, and over the last several years, do several internet presentations during the year, social media mini forecasts. And then I would get off work at 6:30. I would go home and have dinner, and I'd have to be back at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So although, and I only lived about a mile from the station, so it was great, but it's a long day.
Yeah.
And it's not roofing, it's not construction work, but it was emotionally, it was a long day. And that's what leads me to explain to you that I missed all those times with my kids and some sports games I missed. And so I'm trying to make up for it while I'm still healthy.
Do you regret the commitment you made way 40 years ago at the Comedy Store when they said, "Hey, come on and be the utility guy," and all, the next thing you know, you're there forever. Do you regret that decision, or are you?
I had pangs of having sold out. Jay Leno said to me, "You're either a comedian or a weatherman. You can't be both," which is not true. I ended up being both, but I had a decision to make. Back when I got to California in 1980, the early 80s, that was the peak of the comedy boom. I mean, every community had as many comedy clubs as they had Starbucks at a time. But if you weren't somebody with a national reputation, a lot of TV exposure, you couldn't dictate your terms. I was what was called a feature act. When you would go to a club in a little town, you would have usually 3 acts. You would have the opening act, which is the MC, which is usually a local guy that was getting his chops. Then you would have a feature act, which was the middle act. And that's what I was. That was 20 minutes. And you would do 20 minutes, a couple shows a night sometimes. But you do 6 nights a week and get paid $500 or $600. And many times have to pay for your own transportation. I had 2 kids. So the decision was easy for me to take this opportunity, because even though I was taking a regular job as a weatherman, I was still performing, as I said, 2 to 3 nights a week at the local clubs. So I didn't give anything up. As a matter of fact, it enhanced my public exposure and made it easy to get more jobs around town and call attention to myself.
So somehow you had to figure in how to perform in between the weather gigs. You had to be on stage, or was it on a weekend situation where you didn't have to?
That was the thing, if the weather was, between April and October, the forecast in Southern California is morning clouds and fog, hazy afternoon sun, high in the low 70s. So if everything is mellow, if there aren't fires,
Right.
if there aren't El Nino floods, I could go, and my kids got older and they'd have their own things going on. I could go out and do a 20-minute set at the Improv and be back at 8 o'clock, because they had 3 shows a night or 2 shows a night. So no, one job enhanced the other. My ability to work in a club and react to people in the audience, hecklers or whatever, gave me a good crust. And so there was no problem that could occur on live television that would throw me, because that was nothing. Because it was never as bad as a drunk yelling profanities at you from the back of the room. So my performance on TV gave me exposure. My working in the clubs helped me to react, to improvise in any situation. So it was a great twofer.
Now you're in phase 3, which is this podcast. And you and Louise get together. She gets it going. You are right there. You fall into it, as you mentioned earlier, because she has the background to set it all up. Who decides on the guests? Is it a combination of you and Louise, or?
Yes. Well, we have a producer, Dina Friedman.
Okay.
And you know how it is. It's a slow build in podcasts. There are 150,000 podcasts in America right now. And so what you have to do is, you can't look at it like the news, where if you have a couple of days with a bad rating, oh my God, you're in trouble. It's a slow build. It takes a long time to attract attention to yourself. So what we do is we go out and seek guests. Fortunately, we're in Southern California, so we have this whole pool of A, B, and C list stars that are here screaming for attention. So we can call them and ask them to be guests on our show. Okay. And we've gotten to the point now where publicists trust us with some of their top line clients. We have authors and singers and people that have newly released television shows or films or LPs to come on. And so we will get pitched clients now. And so the booking is not as hard as it used to be. It's getting better all the time.
Well, I mentioned earlier, it's about 150 so far you have in the can. Who are some of the interviewees that you really enjoy? Maybe the 3 best interviews you've had so far.
Well, I think Louise would agree with me on this. Our favorite guest has been Henry Winkler, who was a friend of both of ours before we even did the podcast. Louise and I co-produced a television pilot with Henry that was purchased by Comedy Central. But in classic show business drama, the vice president of development for Comedy Central, before our show aired, was fired. And so all of her, projects got swept under the rug, and we never made it, but it was fun. We were friends. But I love people, and I don't know if you agree with this. I love people who are talented, but who are comfortable in their own skin. They don't have to be condescending. They can talk to you on your level. They're interested in you. They don't want to completely talk about themselves all the time. Henry is the most comfortable, uh, 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 empathetic human being you'll ever talk to. We've had him on 2 or 3 times. And anyway, he would be our best.
Yeah, he comes across that way. I've seen him
Yeah.
on interviews, and he just seems to be a very nice guy,
He's
very
the
down to
best.
earth. Yeah.
He's really, he appreciates his success. The great fun with Henry when we were pitching this show before Comedy Central bought it was to walk to pitch meetings with him and go to ICM or William Morris and watch people react to him as he walked in the floor. The seas parted, and he would take time with every single enthusiast, every single fan. He'd sign autographs, he'd take a selfie. He never was too hurried to not respond to everybody. I really have a lot of respect for him and learned a lot about how to treat your fans from him.
It wasn't even the general public that were in awe of him. It were people that work for the agencies.
Yeah.
That's quite okay. So we mentioned Henry. How about 1 or 2 others that you decided?
I've had great guests in various buckets. For politicians, we interviewed Adam Schiff, who was running for senator in the state of California because he was the congressman from my district. But he is truly, I don't care what your politics are, I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on. He's one of the smartest human beings I've ever talked to. And it was fascinating. And he has such a grip of all the issues, the economics of politics in America, where we are in our political divide, where we are in the state of California, in our water issues and everything. Just a great interview. So I would say he was our greatest political interview. For musical guests, I love music. And so we've had 2 guests recently which have blown me away. The band Blood, Sweat, and Tears was famous for being one of the first bands, along with Chicago, to use horns in their rhythm section, right? And they had many hits during the 70s and 80s. And there's a movie out, a new documentary about a trip that very few people knew. Richard Nixon commissioned them to be the first American rock and roll band to tour behind the Iron Curtain as kind of a goodwill tour. And there's a great documentary. So Bobby Colomby, who was the drummer for Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and the producers came, and we had an amazing hour conversation about where America was when they had hits, who they got their songs from, touring in Romania and Hungary, and where they were rejected because they were capitalists. And it was really fascinating. And again, music is my thing. So
well, it's funny you mentioned Nixon because we tend to think of Nixon with Elvis, but not with Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Yeah, well, this was just, he took whoever was popular,
right,
and who he thought would represent the youth of America as kind of hands across the sea kind of a thing. And it was I'm sure it wasn't him. I'm sure it was the State Department. Some young woman in the State Department loved the band or something.
How many buckets? How many buckets do you have, Rich? You mentioned political bucket and music.
I mean, I'm interested in a lot of things, but I like people who are interesting in a number of buckets. The other bucket that we sort of pick from a lot in Southern California is the bucket of child stars and where are they now? Because we have so many who have transitioned out of being a child star or a young adult star into adulthood. And that's not always a pleasant experience. As you know, many suffer from addictions and overuse of money and everything. But I'll give you a great example of a great discovery. Christopher Knight, who was one of the children on the Brady Bunch, came on as a guest. And he turned out to be such an amazing talk, because after he got out of show business, and he still does like fan stuff with the Bradys all over the United States. I mean, that's an iconic television show. He is also a computer genius. He's invented some forms of computer technology. He had his own computer company. He's called in as a consultant to set up these huge networks for entertainment companies. He's a brilliant guy. And it's fun to learn something additional about somebody you were a fan for a completely different reason. And so that was fun. So I have all kinds of things like that.
You mentioned earlier, and we talked about you being comfortable and particularly happy in the age you're at now. Do you find that a lot of your guests either be after a certain age or before a certain age are more interesting, or is age not even a factor? Because I find as I interview people over the years, the people who have lived a life are in a way much more interesting for a number of reasons than those who are much younger.
You
Although I've
just
talked to a
answered
lot of
your
young
own
people
question.
who, what's that?
You just answered your own question. That's exactly right. If they've had some life experience, they've had some pain and some success, they've had a chance to make some transitions in their life, like Christopher Knight, they're much more interested. And if they're comfortable in their own skin, they're a good storyteller. And here's the key to, and I think you'll probably agree with this too. When you have an author on, or somebody that's an expert in some area, or has a new product, meaning a new book or a new record they want to talk about, if you do your homework and read that book and study their work and come to the table with some information, and you're not going to ask them the same stupid red carpet questions that every other interviewer asks them. As soon as they realize you're not going to do that, they trust you and they open up, and then it's an intimate, wonderful, far-reaching conversation.
Totally correct. Totally correct. The other
Those are
thing
my-
that I do as a technique is I try to find out something that's not generally known about the person, either through talking with a friend of theirs, an associate, or just where I find a piece of information that's not generally known. And I'm not obvious with it, but I'll slip it into the conversation while we're talking. And that is a signal to them that I know a little bit more than the
Yeah.
average bear.
And in the broad term, you just care about your guests. I mean,
Always.
if it's not a factory, it's it's a human connection. So
Correct.
that
Correct.
I could tell immediately that you were very good at your job, because you did a little deep dive on some facts there, and I respect that. So,
And I didn't even bring up the time you were in jail. You know, that was totally.
well, I appreciate that. Although I've been exposed to most of those crimes.
That's true. Do you ever get into disagreements with Louise in terms of a particular guest? Does it ever get to that point where she wants someone and you said, I don't know, it's not
I wouldn't
really.
even call it a disagreement. Our first judgment is what's good for the show. And as I said before, the reason we're friends in the first place is we see eye to eye on a lot of what we find interesting. And there are guests that she would like to have on.
That you may not be happy about, or that
huge, say it again.
you may not be interested in, but you think it might.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. She's obsessed with reality shows like The Bachelor and some of these shows, the competition shows, because she gets into it like a chess game. She manipulates all the moves and everything, and she's obsessed with that. So once in a while, she'll have one of her lady friends, one of her co-obsessives. They'll want to talk about that, and I'll just ask a stupid question about what they're wearing or something. But I can be interested in it, but I don't bring as much information or passion at the table that she does. And so that's the only time that has ever happened. She loves music. She's a musician herself. She plays drums and guitar. She did that great documentary about the Cowsills. So she and I have very common interests. So we very seldom will stonewall a guest on one another. It just doesn't happen.
Occasionally, too, it's good to step out of your comfort zone. I find that if I can interview someone, we talked about someone who has lived a life, but I've talked to people that are teenagers and in their early 20s, but because of their intelligence and their talent and what they've done at an early age, I find it's also interesting to talk to those kinds of people as well.
No, you're 1,000% correct. And that's another talent that Louise has. She doesn't have any children of her own, but she has mentored thousands of kids. She had stand-up comedy, writing, and performance classes. She's mentored children. One of her first podcasts was about having a panel of 5 or 8 young people, teenagers, online, and they would take questions from the audience, and she just sort of oversaw that. So she has great insight into positive parenting and positive child rearing. So I agree with you, and they often have, because the world hasn't crushed them like they have adults, that they're freer with their opinions, and a lot of times they're more hopeful. So it's interesting to talk to them.
Do you anticipate, in addition to this podcast, in addition to your specials, including again on Tubi, it's called once again?
Unassisted living.
Unassisted
if you go
living.
to Tubi, it's a free service. You don't have to add another service to your long list of monthly charges. You just go to Tubi and type in my name, and you'll get 3 or 4 letters out, and it will load in immediately.
Excellent. Do you think that You left at actually a good time, your gig on Channel 4, in this sense that streaming services, especially with COVID, streaming services started to take over. There's all these alternative ways to get programming, including Tubi, YouTube, etc. Do you think that you stepped away from it your timing was once again, in a way, exquisite?
Another excellent observation. You're 100% right. I think I stepped off for a couple of reasons. My personal journey, I thought, you get to a point in your life when you say, it's time to step aside and let a younger person take over.
Mhm.
Climate change was coming in. Whether people didn't put up with just, warm humor on the weather, they wanted to know, people were being frightened by atmospheric rivers and climate change and all that. So it was time now for the experts to take over. Also, broadcast television is in a transition period. I don't know what the future is. I think there will always be a need for local news, but I think its delivery system will not be over broadcast television. It may be a podcast. It may be just an internet feed of some kind. But as you say, streaming television is changing the face of television because it's a buyer's market and not a seller's market. When there were no streaming services, people would tune into appointment television, 8 o'clock on Thursday night. They'd watch must-see TV on NBC, Cheers or Seinfeld or whatever. You tuned in with your family, and that was the moment. You ate dinner and got your chores done, and that was the moment. Now you watch when you want to watch, and there's no more appointment television. And your child might be watching one thing on Netflix, and you might be watching something on ESPN in your room. It's a consumer's market now, and the creativity and the amount of product on streaming and the universes being explored with content on streaming, like documentaries and sitcoms and adventure stories, has just amplified by dozens of times. I don't think network primetime can compete with it anymore. So I think the whole rhythm of entertainment is changing. It's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. But to go way back and answer your question, I think I stepped off the ship precisely before it hit the iceberg.
Before I let you go, in addition to the Media Path podcast and some of your stand-up work, do you see doing other things in the near to late future, meaning writing a book, writing a play, etc.? I know you want to spend more time with the family as well, which you're doing now, but is there something else you see creatively you'd like to do?
I would just like to continue doing the stand-up, unencumbered by my job. And I want to write as long as people will listen to me. I love the creative process. 50% of the joy of doing the stand-up for me is the writing process. It's the discipline of every day, forcing myself to sit in front of a blank page and give it a shot. I love doing it. And as long as people will come to see me, I'll continue to do it. I'm on the board of 3 nonprofit organizations. Throughout my whole entertainment career, community outreach has always been very important to me. I love to give back because I've been so very fortunate in my career, and it's always been a family thing. My mom and dad were very active in the community. So I would like to stay healthy and continue what I'm doing.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Fritz Coleman. He co-hosts the Media Path podcast with Louise Polanker, veteran radio producer and documentarian. With 150 episodes released so far, Media Path Podcast is a look back at what has defined our media for the past half century. To watch or listen, go to MediaPathPodcast.com, and you can also catch it on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And Fritz, thanks for being on the show.
It was great to talk with you, Ira. You're really good at your job. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.